Hi everyone, I'm John. Welcome back to my channel, and I am already a day late for quarter 4 of Historathon. I usually like to post on the first day of every quarter, but better late than never. And just in case you haven't seen one of these other videos that I posted over the past year, what I'm trying to do with this list is to give a list of recommendations to you, some of which I have already promised to myself and other people that I'll be reading. But mostly what it is a list for anyone who happens to come across this video and who may want to participate or just get some really good ideas for people who want to read them independently too. I like to sort of curate my list across a wide variety of different genres, as long as it's history adjacent or history and nonfiction. And you'll see that as the books go along. And also different time periods and different geographical locations. So I try to make it somewhat representative just to touch on a lot of different people's potential areas of interests. So I have, I think, 13 or 14 books to show you. So let me just get started. Let me start off with a book that I have already promised myself and two other people that I am going to read with them. And it is a doorstop of a book, but it's also just been sitting on my shelf for I don't even know how many years. It's Tony Judt's Postwar, a history of Europe since 1945. And as far as detailed contents, I can't really tell you other than the fact that it's a history of Europe after World War II. And apparently it was published in 2005 and comes up through 2005. So you get about 6 decades of history, and right up through the year it was published. So I can't believe this thing is almost 2 decades old, but it has been sitting on my bookshelf for probably nearly that long. The other two people I'm reading this with are Stephanie Cohen, the great commenter, and Raynor Reads, who has a new channel. I will leave, Stephanie doesn't have a channel, Raynor Reads does, and I will leave that link below. Everyone knows Stephanie. If you have a channel, she has probably commented on it before. So we're doing that in November and December. We're allotting ourselves 2 months for obvious reasons. And if you are interested in joining us, let me know. I will also try to remember to put my Voxer link below. Feel free to message me. Let me know if you want to join in. We have 3 people. We're always looking for more people who would like to wade through it with us. Okay, so now let's do some others. I think a really, really great inroads to history, if you're not a big history reader, is the memoir. And I tried to pick a few memoirs this time that will just help people who think that history might be hard or boring or dry, and let them know that it doesn't have to be that way. And this is kind of one of those classics that I think may not get as much attention as it deserves. And this is West with the Night by Beryl Markham. This was published in 1942, and it is the memoir of Beryl Markham, who lived a highly unconventional life for a young girl who was born in Edwardian England. As a girl, she moved to Kenya with her father, and she spent a lot of time there as an adventurer, a horse trainer, and eventually found her way into aviation, and was friends with like Isaac Denison and people like Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, a lot of really fascinating early 20th century figures. And maybe her best known accomplishment, if besides the writing of this memoir, is the fact that she was the first person ever to fly non-stop from Europe to North America. Lindbergh flew from North America to Europe, but she flew west with the night, hence the title of the book. So, wonderful memoir. I found this in the library bookstore the other day and thought, great possibility for anyone who wanted to read a memoir. And here's another one, and here's another great early 20th century writer, Vera Brittain. This is Testament of Youth. This came out in 1933, and it tells the story of her very early childhood and takes her up through the year, maybe the mid-1920s. She was born in 1893, I think, so her girlhood through her very early adulthood. Talks about her life. She dropped out of Oxford to enter the armed forces to serve as a nurse, and talks a lot about World War I's impact on civilian life, and especially the lives of women. And also seems like it might include some really fascinating cultural history about how people thought about the war in real time. So another fascinating book, Vera Brittain's Testament of Youth. This is volume 1 of what was intended to be a 3-part biography. She published one other part and was working on a third, I believe, when she died. Next is some Asian history. This is The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang. And this tells the history of a very, very brief episode in the Second Sino-Japanese War, which lasted from the late 30s through the mid-40s, sort of overlapped with World War II. And namely, the Rape of Nanking lasted from December of 38 through December 37 through January of 1938, when the Japanese imperial forces invaded China. And while numbers differ, estimates something like 200,000 to 300,000 people were killed. And this book tells that story through the perspective of 3 different groups of people: the Imperial Japanese soldiers, the Chinese soldiers who were being invaded, and then the Westerners who were living in China from all different countries as it was being invaded in real time. So, some fascinating history there. Brutal history, but fascinating. Here's some American religious history by a really, really wonderful scholar of the time period, and great religious writer and thinker by the name of George Marsden. And this is one of his most well-known books. It's called Fundamentalism and American Culture. And this comes out from Oxford. And I'll just read you the back. Oh, by the way, as you can see there, one of Christianity Today's 100 Books of the Century. Many Americans today are taking note of the surprisingly strong political force that is the religious right. Controversial decisions by the government are met with hundreds of lobbyists, millions of dollars of advertising spending, and powerful grassroots response. How has the fundamentalist movement managed to resist the pressures of the scientific community and the draw on modern popular culture to hold on to their ultra-conservative Christian views? Understanding the movement's history is key to answering this question, and this book has long been considered a classic in religious history and to this day remains unsurpassed. It's a highly regarded analysis that takes us through a full history of the origin and direction of one of America's most influential religious movements. So, American evangelical fundamentalist Christianity comes in a lot of different flavors. I think a lot of people sort of all collapse it down to one thing, but it has its origins in the 19th century with millennialists like John Nelson Darby and others, but I haven't done too much of a deep dive as to what's in here, but it looks really, really fascinating. I'm not sure the extent to which he'll actually get into the politics, because I'm less interested in that as to just the genealogy of the movement itself, as in in insofar as it is a cohesive movement itself. But fascinating stuff. Another memoir, another classic memoir. This is I don't really hear this man's name pronounced out loud. I always see it in print. So I was always under the impression that it was Fussell, but I've heard people say Fussell. If you know, let me know in the comments. Paul Fussell. This is The Great War and Modern Memory, which was originally published in 1975 and is very often listed in best top 50, top 100 best nonfiction books of the 20th century lists. All the time you see it. And it focuses on the literary and the rhetorical ways in which World War I is remembered and mythologized in the modern imagination through portraits of people like David Jones, Isaac Rosenberg, Robert Graves, Edmund Blunden, Wilfred Owen, and other famous and less famous World War I poets, writers. Really, really fascinating literary, cultural history. A lot of overlap there. The Great War and Modern Memory by Paul Fussell, whatever. Only now starting to realize how many nonfiction classics I have on my list. This is maybe the top 1, 2, 3 books you always hear mentioned about the construction of the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project. And it's not the it's not American Prometheus. It's the other one. It's The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes. And this is the 25th year anniversary edition. Remains the seminal and complete story of how the bomb was developed, from turn-of-the-century discovery of the vast energy locked inside the atom to the dropping of the first bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Few great discoveries have evolved so quickly or have been so misunderstood. In this book includes theoretical discussions of nuclear energy to the bright glare of Trinity. What began as merely an interesting speculative problem in physics grew into the Manhattan Project and then into the bomb, which, with frightening rapidity, while scientists known only to their peers, like Szilard and Edward Teller and Oppenheimer, Bohr, Meitner, Fermi, Lorentz, and von Neumann, stepped from their ivory towers and into the limelight. And this is supposed to be, a definitive history of that time and of the science. It doesn't look like the science is too terribly, there aren't many equations, I guess. So if you're worried about your ability to grasp math or really, really intense physics, I don't think it's going to be an issue. But it is sizable. It's well over 700 pages. So, The Making of the Atom. Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes. By the way, in case you're more interested in the H-bomb, the hydrogen bomb, he also wrote another book of similar size on that. So that has its own standalone book. Also could have chosen that, but it's not quite as well known. And of course, it's one hasn't been dropped in war yet, so it's yet. Goodness. All right. So let's do some sort of insider baseball U.S. American presidential history. And this I found last year at the big library book sale, where I brought home something like 30 books. And this is a great copy. They used to make books with this red thing. I don't understand that, but whatever. It's from back then. This is The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam. And it is originally published in 1972, I think, at the height of the Vietnam War. And it's basically his analysis and critique of the intellectuals, the think tank, the intellectual firepower that were making up the body of foreign policy advisors in and around the Kennedy and Johnson administrations during the war, that were used to perpetrate and pursue our fighting in that war. And of course, the title there is a bit of sarcasm and irony on Halberstam's part, because he rips them a new one in this book, thoroughly rips them a new one. So this would be fascinating. Another very, very long book. Some of the books are a bit chunky, but fascinating stuff, and another sort of classic in its own right. All right. So something that's even maybe a little bit more modern, starts in the 70s and comes up through the early 21st century. This is a book from Harvard University Press. And this is Age of Fracture by Daniel T. Rogers. This was originally published in 2011. And it is, very broadly speaking, about the disintegration of values, ideas of markets, the disintegration of our national American consensus, as well as ideas of race and gender, and even civic obligation that took place in the political and cultural debates of the 1970s and 1980s, and how in many ways those disintegrations continue to show themselves in politics and culture today. So, Age of Fracture by Daniel T. Rogers. Sorry about the glare. Alright, so we'll jump back in time to the 19th century. And this is a book that came out, let's see, a while ago. Because you know how I can tell, it has a Borders sticker on the back. I got this from Borders for $16.99, and Borders went out of business in the United States in 2011. So that's how long this has been sitting on my bookshelf, at the very least. This is The Most Famous Men in America, the biography of Henry Ward Beecher. And Henry Ward Beecher, probably know the name Beecher from his more famous sister, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. But Henry Ward Beecher was really a sort of a popular, very, very extremely popular celebrity in his own right back in the 19th century. He was an abolitionist. He was a liberal Congregationalist preacher. And he grew up adopting these ideas that really put him in stark contrast compared to his father, who was also a preacher of a very, very different kind. He was basically a Puritan, a very, very conservative, sort of Calvinistic, Puritan, fire and brimstone sort of preacher. But he grows up, goes into the same line of work, but his theology is very, very different. Becomes a champion for a lot of different liberal causes, including liberal political causes, cultural causes like women's suffrage. This is well before the passage of the 19th Amendment. And the book, from what I understand, sort of culminates in the 1872 episode in which he is accused by Victoria Woodhull, who is the first woman in the United States to ever run for president, that he is an adulterer, which throws even more spotlight into his life and makes him even more famous and sort of results in a famous trial. But a figure that's not really known nearly as much today as he was 150 years ago. Fascinating person, fascinating family. And I thought I would include a little bit of LGBT history. I don't think I've ever done this before in any other pile of possibilities, but I have some that fits in the time period, so I thought I would. This is by Graham Robb, who has written a whole scad of books, mostly 19th century French history. I know he's done biographies of people like Balzac, Victor Hugo, and Arthur Rimbaud, at the very least, and maybe some others. But this is about the Uranians of the 19th century, if you know, you know, and how gay people lived, how they came out, how they formed other homosocial and homoerotic relationships. Spoiler alert, apparently Sherlock Holmes was gay, so that alone might be reason enough to pick it up. And I may or may not, I didn't make Princeton any promises, but they sent this to me earlier for an offer they made me for Historathon. They said pick out 4 books, 1 for each quarter. And I said, okay. And this was the one I picked for quarter number 4. It is a book I've already shown on this channel at least once. And I even got a review copy, which Bill Rutenberg ended up winning, and he showed on his channel several months ago. But this is The Soviet Century, Archaeology of a Lost World by Carl Schlegel. And it is gigantic and printed on the most impressive paper stock I think I've ever seen. This book looks like it's probably 1,500 pages. It's only 900 pages long. And that includes the endnotes and index and bibliography and everything. Another doorstop of a book that I am not sure I'll be able to get to. I will try my best, but I might spend much of this quarter reading some fiction. I will, like I said, I've already made one promise to other people, and I'm going to stick to that promise, but I've been reading a lot for Historathon lately, and I might need a fictional reprieve. This is a cultural history of the Soviet Union, as told through furniture, books, perfume, clothes, houses, a whole host of things that gives you a bit of insight into what it was like living in post-Bolshevik Revolution Russia up through the fall of the Berlin Wall. All right. And last but not least, a book I have already started. This came out, I think, it's 2019. Really, really fascinating topic. obviously a subject that still touches on a lot of aspects of American culture. This is The Fire is Upon Us by Nicholas Buccola. James Baldwin, William F. Buckley Jr., and the debate over race in America. Now, for those of you who may not know, here we have James Baldwin. Here we have Bill Buckley, is how he was usually referred to. Bill Buckley, for those of you who don't know, he used to have a television show back in the 60s and 70s called Firing Line, where he would have people on, and he would be a sort of aggressive interlocutor, usually the conservative interlocutor. He was a cultural, political conservative, had his own show, and he started a magazine back in the early 50s called the National Review, which still exists to this day. And I think everyone is probably familiar with James Baldwin, the great writer. And this is the story of one very famous debate that they engaged in on February 18th of 1965, where Bill Buckley and James Baldwin got together at Cambridge University in the Cambridge Union to discuss the topic of, quote, and I'm quoting here, the American dream at the expense of the American Negro. You can see the debate in full on YouTube. Just Google Buckley Baldwin debate 1965, it'll pop right up. And you can also go see someone who has taken a lot of time to upload videos, has a channel on YouTube called The Firing Line Clips, or The Firing Line Episodes, where they have uploaded hundreds of Buckley's old interviews from his shows in full, not clips, but the full discussions. And he had discussions with absolutely everyone that was famous in politics, culture, writers, poets. I was watching an episode the other day where he was talking to Mary Daly and Rosemary Radford Ruther, two famous feminist theologians. This was back in the day when you would discuss theology on and how it affects popular culture in a TV show. You would never see that today, but he was a firebrand, as I guess Baldwin was too. And in this debate, they take very, very diametrically opposed positions to the question of race in America, with Baldwin coming down on the side that we have a very, very serious problem, and America is basically in a kind of denial about how spiritually sick it is. He casts it in a religious sense. And then Buckley says, you know, we have a right to protect the United States from perceived threats and to protect the perceived order. So, yeah, I mean, it really comes as no surprise that it seems like Baldwin has largely won this debate, even if the effects of his winning have not been fully instantiated in American politics and culture. But it's fascinating to read about their respective backgrounds and childhoods, because he is spending a little bit of time in the first 30, 40, 50 pages on exactly that and how it influenced their adult sense of politics. Really interesting. I'm looking forward to reviewing it on the channel as I eventually get around to doing with everything I read. So this is the other book that I have promised to read. If anyone wants to read this with me, like I said, I will leave my Voxer below. You can leave me a note below as well, letting me know. And let's read this together. I would be fascinated to read this with someone else. That's my list. Let me know, if you haven't already posted your own, what you plan to be reading, what interests you, and I look forward to reading about 1820 to the present day with everyone else who's participating. I will see you anon.